Mitch Albom, in his book, Have a Little Faith, shares the story of Henry Covington. Henry was the second youngest of 7 children. And in their tiny apartment, 4 brothers slept in one room, 3 sisters slept in another, and the rats occupied the kitchen. During his childhood, Henry's mother did 2 years in prison, and his father died when he was just a teenager. Eventually, Henry became a small-time drug kingpin, earning tens of thousands of dollars a month. But then one day he tried the product he was selling, and soon it all came crashing down. The addiction became all-consuming, and soon Henry was broke, strung out, and desperate, so desperate, in fact, that he rallied some friends together, drove to another dealer's house, pulled out a gun, demanded jewelry, cash, and drugs. He left the jewelry and the money for his friends, and he kept the drugs. Later that night, after he'd smoked and sniffed and guzzled alcohol, Henry realized the dealers knew who he was and where he lived, and they would want revenge. So he yelled at his wife to keep the lights off and to stay inside with his daughter, and Henry went outside with his shotgun and hid behind a row of trash cans. He trembled with worry, shame, anxiety, and fright, and he called out to God, "If I promise to give my life to you, will you save me tonight?" He wondered if everything that he'd done as a troubled child, as a delinquent teen, as a bad man, whether God would hear him. In thinking about the story of our lives, we all look back with some sense of embarrassment, shame, contrition, and regret. And perhaps our sins are not the same as Henry Covington's. Perhaps we look at our own cheshbon hanefesh and see a clean slate. Perhaps we are among those people who have a clear conscience and no regrets. But what we learn from tradition is that no matter what we have written on our page in the book of life, the story is not over. There is still more for us to write. No matter where we are on life's journey, there are still chapters for us to author, more experience to glean and to consider, more wisdom to learn and to share. Henry Covington did not die that night. And when the sun rose, he slid the shotgun under his bed, he got on his knees, and he began to pray. And then he embarked on a self-imposed detox where he couldn't eat for 3 days and barely even move. When he recovered, he went to the Pilgrim Assemblies International Church in New York, where he studied under the pastor Bishop Roy Brown, and eventually he was ordained a deacon. And his family moved to an exceptionally poor neighborhood in Detroit, where he started the I Am My Brother's Keeper ministry at a large broken-down church on Trumbull Avenue, with the plaster peeling off the walls and a large hole in the roof. Henry spent his days preaching hope to the desperate. He drove around with donated food and fed the hungry. He opened his own home to men and women who were homeless, people he hardly knew, but understood that they needed a break. He opened the doors of his church to men and women and children who had nowhere else to sleep. He led drug addicts to become sober. And to so many who felt like God had abandoned them, Henry became the image of God in their lives. His desperate parishioners, mostly poor, some still addicted to drugs, many often homeless and penniless, heard in his sermons the voice of God, telling them that if they would keep walking, then God would walk with them. People saw in his eyes the light of God's presence piercing through the darkness. With teshuvah, with tefillah, with tzedakah, we do not change God's consideration of us. We change our consideration of ourselves. We can be agents for holiness and light in a world too often shrouded in profanity and darkness. Like the psalmist, we can sing a new song. And in this new year, we can tell a new story.
Imagine for a moment you are at the beach. It's a swim area, and so they've actually hired a lifeguard to make sure that everyone is safe. But you notice that every few minutes, the lifeguard has to blow the whistle because a swimmer has ventured too deep into the water. And the lifeguard is fearful that if they go much further, they could get pulled out into the ocean. Every few moments, come on back. Too far. Let that person swim on their own. That blast of the whistle gets everyone's attention, even if they were paying attention to what was going on, and even if they weren't. If you're sitting trying to read your Kindle or take a little nap, you might find the whistle to be a little bit annoying. But if it's one of your children who happens to be wandering into the water, you feel comforted by knowing that the lifeguard is looking out for them. The shofar that we blow on these high holy days and on this day of Rosh HaShanah is like that lifeguard's whistle, alerting us to when we are approaching the boundaries we know better than to traverse, compelling us to come back to safety. But unlike the single blast, the lifeguard's whistle that has just that one tone, the shofar gives us a variety of melodies that ask us to go deeper. The single blast of Tekiah, the wails of Shvarim, the staccato of Truah. The blast of Tekiah calls us to take a good, hard look at ourselves. What did we do well and want to repeat? Where did we err, and what can we do about it? If I do not work on myself, who will work on me? Tekiah invites us to ask. The wails of Shvarim are like broken glass under the chuppah, reminding us of the pains in the world and our duty to strive to repair it. Hunger and poverty, injustice and inequality continue to affect our community, and we cannot turn a blind eye. Even as we strive for personal improvement, we are not free from asking ourselves how we can make others' lives better too. If I only work on myself, what am I? Shvarim challenges. The staccato of Truah, like notes of an infantry bugle, rouse us to action. We know what needs to be done. Truah raises our heart rate to get us going. If not now, when? Truah declares. The blasts of the shofar from now through the end of Yom Kippur make this ballad of self-improvement. The beauty of the concert of the three notes is that they all resonate at once. As our instrument for Rosh Hashanah, they remind us that we have this yearly opportunity to adjust the course we have charted for ourselves. We do not need to be the same person we have always been if we don't want to. We have a new opportunity to bring love and goodness into the world. And when 8.5 days from now we hear the final Tekiah Gedolah at the end of Yom Kippur, it will be a celebration of the potential that this new year represents and our blessing of being a part of it.
There's a well-known story about Reb Simcha Bunim, an 18th century Hasidic Rebbe. He carried around with him 2 slips of paper, one in each pocket. On one, there were the words from the Talmud, Bishvili nivra haolam, for my sake the world was created. And on the other piece of paper was a phrase from our father Abraham, V'anochi afar ve'efer, I am but dust and ashes. And Rabbi Simcha Bunim would take out and read each slip of paper necessary for each moment. I think we all know what Reb Bunim means, that when we need a little bit of encouragement, it's important to remember that the world was created for me. And when our ego starts to inflate, it is essential to remember that we are but dust and ashes. And Rabbi Bunim's teaching reminds us that we actually need both, ways to feel closer and further away. In many ways, this story is similar to our admissions throughout the days of awe. We plead to the Holy One for compassion and for mercy as we admit that we are fallible human beings. At certain points, we might need God's comfort as the ultimate parent, Avinu. And at other moments during these holy days, we might be searching for the transcendent God, the God on high, Malkeinu, to admit our failures and to ask for blessings. We need both Avinu and Malkeinu, just like Reb Bunim needed both slips of paper. And for many of us, these two names for God are simply not enough. Our Machzor translates these words sometimes to Almighty and Merciful, and other interpretations evoke images of mother, of queen, of guide, of truth, and on and on and on. And there is a midrash that teaches that when the Holy One is talking to the Israelites, the Holy One explains that they are named according to the actions of the Israelites. So God can be any of these images that we search for through prayer. Perhaps most importantly, the God that I picture in these moments while I pray is different than the God that you picture. Avinu, our parent, Malkeinu, our ruler, the compassionate one who reminds us that the world was created for me, the authoritative ruler who tells us that we are but dust and ashes, not because we pray to different gods, but because the Holy One can be everything to each of us as we all pray together. One God means a whole God who encompasses each of these metaphors all at once, serving each of us as individuals and as the community, especially now as we are seeking God through these holy days. The imagery might change day to day, moment to moment, prayer to prayer, and our prayers will feel different, but throughout it all, may we focus on the ends of the words of Avinu Malkeinu, Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed. May we find the partnership we need from the Holy One and from those around us who are also joined in prayer for help in doing works of justice, acts of love and kindness to make this year truly a Shana Tova.
In our apartment, there is a painting, and if you look for a second longer than normal at the painting, you will see that behind the 3 flowers that are in the front of the painting, there are actually painted over in black 3 flowers. What happened is the perspective was off, and so the artist painted over in black the original flowers and painted new flowers, smaller and closer and better for perspective. But you can still see the traces of the old flowers. And I love that. That concept, when it happens with the documents like scrolls or anything ancient with words that are then written over, is called a palimpsest. What a palimpsest is a page from either a scroll or a book where the text has been washed off or scraped off in preparation for reuse. Remember, this is animal skin, so it's much easier to do that than our thin paper of modern times. It was done for different reasons, for in the interest of economy, or because there was an object that could be reused in a different way but still retain the essence of the original. And there are lots of Hebrew texts that if you see and look below, you will see a second text behind them after the first has been scraped away. That idea of a palimpsest is what I want to connect with our Torah portion of this morning, Bereshit, the beginning of the Torah, as we celebrate the birthday on the world of Rosh HaShanah. Because we begin anew and anew and anew every year, but that doesn't mean that the old that's on us and written by us does not get washed away. It's still there like the first set of flowers in the painting. And in the same way in Judaism, we are not supposed to forget this Torah, these texts. We not only are commanded to come back to it again and again every year and reading it here on the Bima, but when the children of Israel crossed the river Jordan into the land of Israel, they were told to paint a monument or a rock, kind of like, you know, those rocks that high schools get painted by the seniors every year. Like there's always a big rock that gets repainted and repainted. In that spirit, again and again and again, there was a dramatic ceremony where the fundamentals of Torah were inscribed on the rock after the people came into the land, and the people would respond, Amen, a consensus. As if this writing of the ideals of Torah again and again keeps them alive. It's why the 10 Commandments are symbolized up there on the wall in the sculpture. And it's why they're in different books that we have and you see in display in public places. Because just because we read them here doesn't mean that they come alive or that we tell these stories again and again. Instead, to preserve them, we must talk about them. We must plaster them. If they get scraped away or erased from our lives, we must, like the palimpsest, write over them again and again and again. The best way that I always studied for tests was to rewrite the information again and again and again until it stuck. The Torah knew that and commanded us to do that again and again and again. But as moderns, we have another complexity that we have to add to writing the Torah again and again. It has been left behind in many cases and many situations with the modern wanderings, with the people who had to travel through wildernesses of the ancient ages and the modern times and left the words behind. And so we don't even have them to write. Shai Zarchi tells a mythic story of the renewal of Judaism that needs to happen in light of this circumstance. If you imagine your ancestors traveling through the wilderness, they had to leave behind some luggage. To make long journeys, as our ancestors did before us, they had to leave things behind. And then there was hope when they got to a mountain, whether that mountain was going to be the land of Israel, the United States, or Europe, or wherever in the world they were going to resettle after a difficult and painful wilderness wandering we have experienced. They still had to leave other luggage at the foot of the mountain. If you've ever made an arduous climb up a mountain, you know that it is very easy to want to leave your water and your backpack and things behind as the climb gets higher and higher. And so even up to the journey of better places, the mountains that the Jewish people would arrive at, they had to leave more luggage behind. And then we had to get busy establishing our place at the top of the mountain, whether it was here in the United States, as generations of immigrants made this country their home, or establishing the state of Israel or other places around the world. The way we live as Jews had to be sussed out, had to be sorted out, had to be figured out, and there was no time to worry about the luggage that was left in the wilderness or at the bottom of the mountain, or we might have dropped along the way up. But now here we are, settled, at peace, in a relatively good place in the world, and we miss our luggage. But we don't even have the words or the items or the volumes to recreate what was on them. So what we need to do is become a living palimpsest. We need to figure out the words and the objects and the ideals and the inspirations that inspired the generations that came before us, to figure out what words are written on our souls, what we can uncover, what is there deep behind inside that we are not even aware of. I was shocked to find out in doing some research that Yitzhak Rabin's mother was born in the same city as one of my family members. And Yitzhak Rabin's mother was feisty and strong-willed. It must be something in the water of that city, because I take that with me in my own palimpsest, who I am, what is written on my soul. And more important than informing our personal ideals and who we are by looking backwards to what was written on the souls of the family members that came before us, there was a larger Jewish ideal. By rewriting the ideals of Torah again and again, by figuring out their relation to our lives, we keep track of time. We keep track of what has happened to us in Jewish history for the times we were not allowed to have luggage or were destroyed for being Jewish, so that when we regather the luggage, we are aware of the sanctity of time, whether it is in beautiful times or difficult times. That is why the Jewish calendar is so important. That is why the Jewish people, whether in concentration camps or in exile or in wandering and climbing mountains or even arriving at the top, find such importance in calendars. And so in this period of the Jewish holidays, we read the beginning of Torah, and we'll come to it again when we mark the beginning of the cycle of Torah reading. If we can figure out how to engrave on our most top layer the palimpsest, acknowledge what is below, what has come before, and also rewrite anew in the spirit of Bereshit, the words of creation that we write on this Torah, then perhaps we too can know the beauty of what lies below. We can deep dig inside, regather the luggage that was abandoned in the wilderness wandering at the bottom of the mountain, and take it afresh anew in a new beginning. Shana Tova.